I'm Shailyn and I sew. You guys seem to like the video and post on Instagram that I made about the different types of circle skirts that I made last week. So in this video I wanted to go over gathered skirts, how much gathering you need to create a certain amount of poof, and also I wanted to go over the two different ways to gather on your sewing machine. So before we begin, does anyone have any guesses on how much gathering I needed to do to create this amount of floof on my skirt? We'll go over that at the end of the video. So the first thing I wanted to do in this video is to go over the two different ways to gather. The first way we're going to gather is the normal way that's taught in schools, in classes, etc. And this method uses the basting stitch. Now a basting stitch is a really long stitch. On your sewing machine, what you want to do is to put your sewing machine on the longest length stitch possible. And then once you do that, all you have to do is sew a straight line down the seam allowance of your skirt. And you're going to do that 2 times. Now the reason we do 2 stitches instead of just 1 stitch, and I admit I've done this in the past, is if you do 1 stitch, you are more likely going to break your thread when you pull the stitches, when you pull the fabric to gather the fabric. You're also going to lose some of the gathering, I've noticed, just from doing the 1 stitch. It's also easier to create even gathers when you have 2 stitches instead of 1 stitch line. And I think that's just because it disperses the gathers across 2 rows of stitching instead of just 1 row. So once you've created the 2 rows of stitching, what you're going to do is take the top thread of both lines of stitching and you're going to pull the fabric gently and you're going to start gathering your fabric. And there you have it, you've gathered fabric. Now the second method of gathering is my favorite method, which is to use a string. What I'm using here is just a regular cord, macrame cord, and use a zigzag stitch. So I set my sewing machine to a zigzag stitch and then I set it to the widest length possible for the zigzag, so it would zigzag as wide as it can. And then what you do from there is you zigzag stitch over top of the cord, making sure that you do not stitch on the cord. You're essentially just creating a casing for the cord to lay in. And then once you're done stitching all the way down your piece of fabric, you're going to take the cord and you're going to pull the fabric away from it at the end. Now make sure you don't pull the cord on the other side. So what I usually do is I put like a pin or clip it so it doesn't move and I don't pull the cord out. But what you do is you're just going to grab the cord and you're going to gather the fabric like you did in the first method. Now this is my favorite method because I find it to be quicker and easier than doing 2 rows of basting stitches, and that's because if you have a really long amount of fabric, you're going to be doing a lot of stitching all the way across 2 times versus a zigzag stitch all the way across once. So I like this method. I also find it easier to control the gathering with the cord and the fabric instead of using the thread. I find it easier to just pull on it and I don't have to worry about potentially breaking the thread. So now that you know the 2 methods of gathering, we're going to go over the math of how to create your gathered skirt. Now basically a gathered skirt is a rectangular piece of fabric that is a certain amount wider than your actual waist. So for the purpose of this video, we will be using a 30-inch waist and we will be using that to multiply and get how much fabric we're going to need. So in this first skirt, it's going to be gathered 2 times wider than the waist. So that means I'm taking 30 inches, multiplying it by 2, and I get 60-inch wide piece of fabric. Now I've gathered that amount for the demo right here, And what I've done is I put it actually on top of a petticoat. The petticoat underneath just kind of shows how the gathered skirt lays a little bit better. And as you can see here, you can tell that the skirt poofs out just a little bit and the skirt goes in just at the waist and cinches in. So if you want just a little bit of a flare for your skirt, all you need to do is do 2 times your waist. Now the next skirt we're going to go over is 2.5 times your waist. So we're doing 30 inches times 2.5, and that's 75. So 75, so what I've done here is I've gathered 75 inches of fabric into 30-inch waist, and for this demo, as you can see, it's a little bit more flared than the first skirt. There's a little bit more poof, and there's a little bit more flowiness to it. Now this next skirt we're going over is 3 times your waist. So that's 30 inches, or your waist, times 3, and we get 90. So I took 90 inches of fabric and I gathered it into the waist there. And as you can see, it's a lot more poofy. And I believe 3 times the amount of your waist is usually the recommended amount for a regular gathered skirt. I've looked it up online and I've noticed that quite a few people recommend 3 times. I don't really know why that's the standard, or so it seems. It definitely does look really nice. You have a lot of flare in the skirt and not too much gathers that you have to worry about how it stitches when you stitch the gathers down. Now this last skirt that we're going over is 4 times your waist measurement. So 30 times 4 is 120 inches. So I took 120 inches of fabric and I've gathered that down to 30. And as you can see, it's a lot more flared. It's definitely poofier than the rest of the skirts, and it's probably a twirly skirt. So, but the issue here is, and I've zoomed in here, the issue is you're starting to run into issues where the gathering of the fabric is starting to get really thick. So when you think about how you're going to sew this, you have to think about how many layers you're going to end up sewing. With this amount of gathering, with the waistband, with the zipper, are you going to have issues with sewing everything down? So that's just an extra thing for you to think about when you create your gathered skirt. How much gathering do you want to do? Do you want to do 2 times, 2.5 times, 3 times, or 4 times your waist, or even more? And you have to consider how much fabric you're going to use and how much fabric you're going to end up sewing. As you've noticed in 4 times waist skirt, the fabric was gathered a lot, so there's going to be a lot of layers that you have to sew down. So those are just some things to think about. Now that I've gone over all the different skirts, can you guess which one this is? If you guessed that this is 4 times my waist, then you are correct. Because when I did it on the mannequin, I realized that I really wanted to make it for myself. So I decided I'm just going to add a little waistband and a zipper and some pockets and I'll be done. So here is 4 times skirt. And if anyone's wondering, I didn't really have any issues sewing down the amount of gathers on my sewing machine. My biggest tip, if you want to make a really big gathered skirt like this, is to make sure that all the gathers are even all the way across. Because if you don't, you'll end up with a little bit of gathering in one portion and then a lot of gathering in another portion, which means that section will be a lot thicker when you sew it down. So just keep the gathers even all the way around and it'll be a lot easier to sew down. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I really love doing these videos where I kind of show you the differences between one skirt and another. So if you have any ideas, feel free to let me know, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to my channel.